is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories: Israeli forces push into more areas of Gaza as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says it's the beginning of the end for Hamas. Our other headlines: no safe place left in Gaza. The United Nations and international aid groups raise their warnings of starvation and the spread of disease. Reduce the use but not phase out. The long-awaited draft from COP28 climate talk says fossil fuel use and production must fall by 2050. And Britain's Prime Minister denies dysfunction at the top of government during the pandemic as he gives evidence to a public inquiry. Israel says dozens of Hamas militants have surrendered or been killed in Gaza in the last 24 hours, with reports of fierce clashes in and around the city of Khan Yunis. The Israeli Defense Forces have hit several targets across the territory. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called it the beginning of the end for Hamas. But Hamas has warned that no Israeli hostages will leave Gaza alive without more prisoner exchanges. Well, the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees says there is now no safe place anywhere in Gaza. Smoke bombs fired near tents in the Jabalia refugee camp caused panic as clashes took place. Many people have already fled south to Rafah, but southern areas are also being bombarded, and hospitals say they are totally overwhelmed. And there are dire warnings of food shortages and the spread of disease and a breakdown in the rule of law as people become increasingly desperate. People have climbed onto aid trucks to try and get hold of food and basic supplies. The United Nations, the World Health Organization and other international aid agencies have described the situation as apocalyptic. Well, let's now talk to our correspondent, Noor Harazin, who's in Gaza. Noor, a lot of military activity overnight. What's happening on the ground?
Well, yes, as the Israeli tanks withdraw from some areas in northern Gaza and from central Gaza City, from the heart of central Gaza City, they are intensifying their attacks and the Israeli land invasion here in southern Gaza, specifically in eastern Khan Yunis. The Israeli tanks are now moving towards the main roads of the heart of Khan Yunis city. The Israeli drones thrown leaflets on the Palestinians who are residing inside the heart of Khan Yunis, asking them to evacuate. Yes, there is a small number of people that are evacuating. However, a lot of people are not actually evacuating. The reason why is because, as you mentioned before, people do believe that there is nowhere safe in Gaza, and the camps that the IDF talked about, like Al Mawasi camp, the UN camp in southern Rafah, these places are totally full now. There is zero infrastructure there, no running water, no network, no fuel, nothing. So actually some of the people now prefer to stay in their homes. From Hamas, there was actually a statement yesterday by Abu Ubaidah, who is the spokesperson of Al-Qassam Brigades. Al-Qassam Brigades is the militant wing of Hamas, and he talked about how there is intensive battles here on the ground between the Palestinian militants and Israeli forces in different areas in Gaza, like Jabalia refugee camp, Ash-Shuja'iyya, and also Jabalia. Regarding the people that were kidnapped, actually a statement from Hamas said that those are not Hamas fighters, those are civilians, and people here on the ground, relatives of those people that managed to identify them from the photos, talked to the media, published on social media. Some pointed at their fathers, like, this is a UN worker, this man is a pharmacist, this man is an owner of a shop. So they are trying trying to say it is all Israeli claims that Hamas surrendered. Hamas statement, also Hamas statement that was published on social media, said, and I quote, Palestinian fighters, militant fighters from Hamas would prefer to die and not to surrender.
As this conflict enters its 10th week, is there any way for people there to have any sense of normality?
Well, I don't think that it is that easy, especially the situation that the people here are living in and going through. I mean, through weeks now, we have been talking about the deteriorating humanitarian situation. There is no water. There is rarely any access to food. Yes, people are running after and climbing trucks of a humanitarian aid because they are thirsty, they are hungry. People are actually breaking into some of the closed shops to try and take whatever they need. And it is not only about water and food, but now it's about clothes, shoes, blankets, anything that they actually could help them during this very hard situation that they are going through. Here inside the Al-Aqsa Hospital yesterday, actually, there was this initiative by a group of Palestinian young men and women here inside the hospital. They did this like outdoor cinema for tens of children who are residing inside the hospital. So here is the thing. These children actually evacuated their homes. They are displaced. They came here inside the hospital to take shelter in tents. And this is a way from Palestinians to Palestinians just to bring some joy to those children, even though they are going through the worst. I mean, there is, as I said before, no access to water, no access to food, especially that they are living inside the hospital and there is a spread of disease. The health ministry talked about new viruses, a new pandemic. So yes, this environment is not healthy anymore.
Noor, thank you for that. Our correspondent Noor Harazin in Gaza. Well, let's take you to Israel now and speak to our correspondent Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv. Sarah, what has Israel been saying about these latest advances on the ground and the latest airstrikes?
Hello there, Jamie. Well, look, strong words from the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. He says this is the beginning of the end for Hamas, while we've also heard from the National Security Advisor, Zaki Hanegbi, who says that this war could go on for months. Now, all of this as Israeli troops continue to push further south, down into that Khan Yunis area, ordering these people to move further south down toward Rafah. Now, it's Khan Yunis that Israel believes is the place where these senior Hamas leaders are hiding, including the leader of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, 61-year-old Yahya Sinwar, who is the most wanted man in Israel. Officials say that they have him surrounded, and when they find him, they will take him out and they will kill him. Now, also on the ground today, Jamie, another first since 2006, Israel releasing these pictures of what it says is a logistical drop of equipment to Israeli troops. It is the first time this has happened since the 2006 Lebanon war, so certainly plenty happening there on the ground as airstrikes continue right across the Strip, and Israel, as I said, continues to push further and further south.
Sarah, thank you for that. Our correspondent Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv. A draft text for the final deal at the COP28 climate talks offers options for reducing greenhouse gases, but does not refer directly to a full phase-out of fossil fuels. Countries have been at odds over whether to include a mention of a phase-out or a phase-down of coal, gas and oil use. Members of OPEC oil-producing countries were reportedly blocking a deal which would include a pledge to phase out fossil fuels. The final agreement must be passed by consensus by nearly 200 countries present. Before the text was published, the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called for decisive action.
It is essential that the global stocktake recognises the need to phase out all fossil fuels on a time frame consistent with the 1.5-degree limit and to accelerate a just, equitable and orderly energy transition for all. A transition that takes into account the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities in light of national circumstances, not to reduce ambition, but to combine ambition and equity.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, make or break, doubts grow over French immigration reforms, putting Emmanuel Macron's leadership to the test.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Israeli forces push into more areas of Gaza as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says it's the beginning of the end for Hamas. Our other headlines: no safe place left in Gaza. The United Nations and international aid groups raise their warnings of starvation and the spread of disease across the enclave. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has been defending his role in the UK government's handling of the COVID pandemic as he came before the COVID inquiry. Sunak, who was finance minister at the time, was questioned over his so-called Eat Out to Help Out scheme launched in 2020. The government's scientific advisers raised concerns that the now Prime Minister prioritised the economy over public health. Opening his testimony, Sunak said it was important to learn lessons.
I just wanted to start by saying how deeply sorry I am to all of those who lost loved ones, family members through the pandemic, and also all those who suffered in the various different ways throughout the pandemic and as a result of the actions were taken. I've thought a lot about this over the past couple of years. It's important that we learn the lessons so that we can be better prepared in the future.
Our correspondent Yolo Abdavid has been following the story. So the Prime Minister, as you know, is Rishi Sunak, with some difficult questions to answer at this inquiry. What else has he been saying?
He obviously listened to his former boss, Boris Johnson, last week, who also started his testimony with an apology. He was the Chancellor. He was in charge of the monetary policy of the government, and he was in charge of officials at the Treasury during the beginning of the COVID pandemic. So we were expecting a lot of questions this morning, and it continues this afternoon, in terms of what had the priority. And again, we had very careful, considerate, focused testimony from Mr. Sunak, where he, as yet, hasn't been able not to answer the very carefully orchestrated questions to him. So in terms of to eat out, help out, probably one of the most controversial policies that he's been associated with, which in August 2020, after the first lockdown, that he wanted to reopen sectors of the economy and encourage people to go out to eat. Now, previously in the inquiry, we heard from Chris Whitty, who was the chief medical officer in advising the government. He said that this policy was eat out to help out the virus, as it was then sort of joked about. I don't think the inquiry as yet have heard everything we can hear from Mr. Sunak about that. And also, he was very comfortable for most of the morning, apart from when he was asked about if there were emails that he recognised or WhatsApp messages that he knew about, and he said, oh, I can't remember, falling back on the same excuse we've heard actually from other ministers from that Conservative government in 2020 and 2021. And of course, the bereaved families who are there sitting in, listening to the evidence day after day, can't understand why very clever, able men are not able to qualify what they say on oath, under oath, and not remember specific details. I think that is quite revealing. But in terms of everything else, I think it's been a polished performance by Mr. Sunak. I saw Mr. Johnson more than I saw my wife, he said, during the pandemic. He was the ultimate decision maker. He hasn't spent any time at all denigrating Boris Johnson or indeed the government at the time. He has other things to think about, Jamie.
Let's just put the COVID inquiry to one side, because it's obviously going to be a very difficult and challenging week for the Prime Minister, because his plans for sending migrants to Rwanda comes before Parliament and the House of Commons.
Yes, it does. A second reading tomorrow. There will be a vote on Tuesday. It doesn't help him at all that while he's been addressing the inquiry, the COVID inquiry, his members of Parliament in his own party are debating whether they're going to support him or not, support this Rwanda bill. This is about taking illegal migrants back out of the country once they've arrived here illegally. The figures have been growing over the last few years. Successive governments have failed to deal with illegal migrants and other migrants coming to Britain. Now, the difficulty for the Prime Minister is that, you know, well-known Conservative MPs are now talking about, well, how can we support him? There will be at 6 o'clock this evening in Parliament another meeting of these right-wing Conservative members who don't believe that there is enough authority, or indeed that Parliament can decide what happens to these migrants through this new Rwanda bill, and it might still fall down to the Human Rights Act and the European Court of Justice and the International Court of Justice to deal with this. Now, this goes to the heart of why Mr. Sunak and Boris Johnson before him were keen to support Brexit in order to have that independence of Parliament here in the UK. That's still obviously been discussed.
Yolo, we'll talk again in the coming hours on what's going to be a busy day in UK politics. Our correspondent, Yolo Abdavid. Let me just take you back now to one of the other big stories of the day, and this draft text that we are just seeing from COP28, climate talks offering options for reducing greenhouse gases, but it does not refer directly to a phase-out of fossil fuels. Our correspondent Yasser Hakim has been watching the negotiations and the horse trading in Dubai. Yasser, countries obviously terribly split over whether to include a phase-out, and there's no direct mention in the new draft text just published.
Yes, and there's a lot of anger, or let's say dissatisfaction, from some of the countries, especially European countries, who were expecting that there will be a clear time plan or dates or some kind of mechanism for the phase out of the fossil fuels, which they did not find in the text, like you said. obviously, the UN Secretary General earlier in the day sort of hinted that this can happen when he said there should be a compromise and it doesn't have to be a phase out that is equal to everyone. Each country has its own circumstances, its economy, and therefore it can be a phase out on different periods or according to each country. So obviously this text is sort of reflecting what he said, that maybe not to expect what some countries, especially developed countries, were hoping for. What will happen now is that there will be a plenary session headed by the president of COP28, where the delegations will be sitting to discuss this draft. They will put their points of view ahead, what they need to change. It's just a draft at the moment. And he hopes, the president, that they might reach some kind of compromise and issue a final draft, maybe by Wednesday or Thursday. But we're just talking about Stockdale. There's still other draft texts that we are expecting either tonight or tomorrow morning concerning mitigation, adaptation, and climate finance, which is called implementation of the means of implementation. So there's supposed to be 4 texts. The 3 texts are also expected to land soon, and also the delegates at the plenary session will be discussing, each group will be discussing each part of this and putting their concerns ahead, putting their ideas, what needs to change. And after these discussions at the end, a final draft and a final resolution should be announced that ends the COP. And with this final resolution, we'll see if it will be a success or not, and will it be satisfactory for most of the teams or not. Obviously, discussions, what I'm told by officials here, will take hours and maybe into next day throughout the night. So it's not something that we might find a solution very soon, but it could go on till through the night tomorrow or even after tomorrow. In Egypt last year, it took 2 days to get the final draft approved after the text was sent to the teams. So we'll see how fast will they be able to reach a solution this time, if they reach a solution. Back to you.
Yasser, we might come back to you in an hour or so, but for the moment, thank you, our correspondent Yasser Hakim in Dubai. Well, environmental groups are demanding urgent action to clean up Italy's most polluted cities, which also have the country's highest rates of premature deaths and serious respiratory illnesses. The Po Valley farming and industrial heartland has some of the worst air quality in Europe and repeatedly fails to meet both EU and World Health Organization targets. Our correspondent Hermione Kitson reports.
Cremona is famous for its Romanesque cathedral, Italy's highest bell tower, and its ancient violins. However, it's also notorious as one of the country's most polluted cities.
It is very serious because the Po Valley is one of the 5 most polluted regional areas in Europe.
Figures by the European Environment Agency show that air in Cremona and the Po Valley has 4 times the World Health Organization's guideline limit for fine particulate matter. It's otherwise known as PM2.5 and has been linked to thousands of premature deaths.
I know that unfortunately the incidence of deadly diseases is above the norm, and that makes me really scared as a resident.
Unfortunately, at Cremona there are many problems associated with cancer. My partner recently also suffered from this problem.
Lombardy's Regional Environmental Protection Agency says the area's geography is partly to blame.
Po Valley is in a particular situation because mountains close Po Valley on 3 sides. So meteorological conditions are often adverse to air dispersion.
Pollutants therefore remain in the lowest part of the atmosphere and become more concentrated. Industry and agriculture are significant factors at play, as the Po Valley is Italy's farming and manufacturing heartland. But with factories like these, it's clear to see the environmental cost of the region's economic importance. Italy has repeatedly failed to stay within the European Union's air quality limits, and new guidelines would reduce pollutants such as fine particulate matter and nitrogen dioxide by up to half by 2030. Authorities claim the situation has improved due to electric vehicles and other initiatives, but the EU and WHO targets are still out of reach.
Our meteorological conditions are so particular that even if our emissions are not worse than in other parts of Europe, we need more time.
Environmental groups say it's an excuse that's wearing thin.
There are areas that have a meteorological disadvantage, but it doesn't mean they have less responsibility.
And so, as authorities fight to extend their deadline, residents continue their battle to save lives. Hermione Kitson, CGTN, Cremona.
Australia has announced plans to halve migration within 2 years. The Labor government aims to reduce the annual intake to 250,000 people, roughly in line with pre-pandemic levels by 2025. Visa rules for international students and low-skilled workers will be tightened, with new visas created for highly skilled workers in growth industries. The government has described the 10-year plan as an attempt to fix the country's broken immigration system. The government of Poland's acting Prime Minister is expected to lose a vote of confidence in Parliament. The ruling Law and Justice Party failed to secure a parliamentary majority in October's elections. But a coalition of opposition parties, headed by the former European Union Council President Donald Tusk, looks set to secure a majority, with Tusk on track to become the next Prime Minister. The UK has sent 2 mine-hunting ships to Ukraine as Russia continues to block shipping routes in the Black Sea. The vessels are part of a new coalition between the UK and Norway to try to boost Ukraine's maritime capabilities and strengthen ties with NATO. This comes as EU leaders meet on Thursday to decide whether to open membership talks with Kyiv and grant a further $53 billion in economic support to the country. China has issued a cold weather alert as blizzards and snowstorms sweep through northern China. More than 60 flights and several high-speed trains out of Beijing have been cancelled. Schools are closed in several cities. Meteorologists warn that cities in the northeast face an extreme cold snap as temperatures could drop to minus 30 degrees Celsius. The headlines again. Israeli forces push into more areas of Gaza as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says it's the beginning of the end for Hamas. Our other headlines: no safe place left in Gaza. The United Nations and international aid groups raise their warnings of starvation and the spread of disease across the enclave. And reduce the use, but not phase out. The long-awaited draft from COP28 climate talk says fossil fuel use and production must fall by 2050. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.